Commercial ends, you're crying. Someone hugs a dog in a movie, you're crying. A stranger compliments you at the grocery store, you're crying in your car. And somewhere in your head, a voice whispers, "What is wrong with you? Why can't you just hold it together like everyone else?" Let me tell you something that might change everything. There is nothing wrong with you. Your tears aren't weakness, they're data. And what they're telling you is something most people will never understand. If you're someone who cries at everything, who feels too much, too fast, too deeply, this isn't an intervention. This is an explanation. Because what society calls overly emotional, neuroscience calls something entirely different. Let me start with a scene you've probably lived 1,000 times. You're at work. Someone gives you feedback. Not even harsh feedback, just constructive criticism. "Hey, maybe try it this way next time." And immediately you feel it. That hot pressure behind your eyes. That tightness in your throat. You know what's coming and you're doing everything in your power to stop it. Don't cry, not here, not now. But your body doesn't care about appropriate timing. The tears come anyway. And now you're not just dealing with the feedback, you're dealing with the shame of crying in front of people, the humiliation of being too sensitive, the fear that everyone thinks you can't handle reality. But here's what's actually happening in your brain and why it has nothing to do with weakness. Your limbic system, the emotional processing center of your brain, has a different threshold than most people's. Specifically, your amygdala, the part that processes emotional stimuli, is more reactive. It's not broken, it's not defective, it's just calibrated differently. Think of it like volume settings. Most people's emotional volume is set at a 5 or 6, yours is set at an 8 or 9. Every input, every stimulus, every emotional moment registers louder, sharper, more intensely. You're not choosing to feel more. Your nervous system is wired to perceive more. Psychologists call this high sensitivity, and approximately 15 to 20% of the population has it. You're not rare in a broken way, you're rare in a profound way. But let me go deeper because there's usually a reason why your dial got set so high in the first place. For many people who cry easily, their emotional reactivity isn't just genetic, it's adaptive. It developed as a response to an environment where emotions were dangerous, confusing, or unpredictable. Maybe you grew up in a home where you had to read the room constantly, where you learned to detect the slightest shift in mood because your safety depended on it, where you became an emotional translator, picking up on what wasn't being said, feeling what others were denying. Your tears aren't random. They're the overflow of a system that was forced to hold too much, too young. Here's what happens. When children grow up responsible for managing other people's emotions, when they become the thermometer for the household's emotional temperature, their nervous system develops hypervigilance to emotional stimuli. They don't just feel their own feelings, they absorb everyone else's. Psychologists call this emotional contagion, and for highly sensitive people, it's not a choice, it's automatic. You walk into a room and you feel the tension no one's acknowledging. You sense the sadness someone's hiding behind their smile. You carry emotional weight that doesn't even belong to you, and all of that has to go somewhere, so it comes out through your tears. But here's where it gets really interesting. Recent neuroscience research shows that people who cry easily actually have different brain chemistry. Specifically, they have higher baseline levels of prolactin, a hormone that regulates emotional tears. This means your tears aren't just psychological, they're biological. Your body is literally designed to release emotion through crying. And when you try to suppress it, when you hold it in because you're afraid of being judged, you're working against your own physiology. Think about what tears actually are. They're not weakness leaking out, they're your nervous system's release valve. They're how your body processes and expels stress hormones like cortisol. They're a biological reset button. Studies show that emotional tears contain stress hormones and toxins that your body needs to eliminate. When you cry, you're literally detoxifying, you're regulating, you're healing. So when you shame yourself for crying, you're shaming yourself for having a highly effective emotional immune system. Let me tell you what else is happening that most people don't understand. People who cry easily often have what psychologists call thin boundaries, not in a defensive way, but in a perceptual way. The membrane between you and the world is more porous. You don't just observe life, you absorb it. Music doesn't just sound nice, it moves through you. Art doesn't just look pretty, it cracks you open. Other people's pain doesn't stay at a distance, it becomes yours. And yes, this makes life harder, but it also makes you capable of something extraordinary: deep empathy, real empathy. Not the performative kind where people say, I understand and move on, the kind where you actually feel what others feel, where you sit with people in their pain without trying to fix it, where your presence alone becomes healing because you're one of the few people who truly sees them. This is why highly sensitive people often end up in caregiving roles: teachers, therapists, nurses, social workers, not because they're martyrs, but because their nervous system is built for attunement. They notice what others miss. They feel what others dismiss. They create safety in spaces where others would walk right past the suffering. Your tears are proof of your capacity for connection. And in a world that's growing increasingly numb, increasingly detached, increasingly disconnected, that's not a flaw. That's a superpower you've been taught to apologize for. Now let's talk about the shadow side, because I'd be lying if I said this trait doesn't come with a cost. When you feel everything deeply, you don't just feel the beautiful things. You feel the painful things with equal intensity. Rejection doesn't sting, it devastates. Disappointment doesn't frustrate, it crushes. Loneliness doesn't feel like solitude, it feels like exile. And because your emotions are so big, so overwhelming, so constant, you probably learn to fear them. You learn that feeling too much makes you a burden, that crying makes people uncomfortable, that your depth scares people away. So you started performing, pretending to be lighter than you are, apologizing for your tears, making jokes when you're breaking, hiding in bathrooms, in cars, in the shower, anywhere you can fall apart without witnesses. And over time, you internalized a belief that's been poisoning you. Something is wrong with me. But here's the truth. There is nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not defective. You're a person with a nervous system that processes emotion the way some people process sound or light or physical sensation, with intensity, with depth, with full body immersion. And the reason this feels like a curse is because you're living in a culture that worships emotional suppression, that celebrates keeping it together, that treats vulnerability like a weakness instead of the profound act of courage it actually is. But let me tell you what happens when you stop fighting your tears, when you stop apologizing for your depth, when you start treating your sensitivity not as a flaw to fix, but as a feature to honor. You start to realize that the people who shame you for crying are usually the people most afraid of their own feelings, that the ones who call you too sensitive are often the ones who've numbed themselves into emotional flatness. You start to see that your tears aren't the problem. The problem is a world that's terrified of genuine emotion, that would rather you perform strength than admit struggle, that mistakes numbness for resilience. And you start to understand something profound. Your ability to cry isn't a sign that you can't handle life. It's a sign that you're still connected to it, that you haven't armored yourself, that you haven't shut down, that you're still brave enough to feel in a world that's constantly telling you not to. Let me tell you about a study that will validate everything you've ever felt. Researchers found that people who cry easily score significantly higher on measures of emotional intelligence, empathy, and interpersonal awareness. They're better at reading facial expressions, better at detecting lies, better at understanding complex emotional states. Your tears aren't making you weaker, they're making you wiser. Because here's what most people don't realize: the ability to cry requires an incredible amount of courage. It requires you to be present with discomfort, to sit with pain instead of numbing it, to allow yourself to be seen in your most vulnerable state. People who never cry aren't stronger than you. They're just more defended, more disconnected, more afraid. You, on the other hand, you're still open, still feeling, still alive in ways that most people have forgotten how to be. So the next time someone looks at you with pity or discomfort when you cry, remember this: your tears are not a malfunction. They're a message. They're your body's way of saying, I'm still here. I'm still human. I'm still connected to the part of me that feels. And in a world that's constantly asking you to be less, to feel less, to need less, choosing to stay open, choosing to keep feeling, choosing to honor your tears instead of hiding them, that's not weakness. That's rebellion. That's strength. That's you refusing to become another person who's alive but not living, who's breathing but not feeling, who's existing but not experiencing. So cry at the commercials, cry at the kindness, cry at the music that splits you open, cry at the beauty and the pain and the overwhelming complexity of being human. Because your tears aren't proof that you're broken, they're proof that you're still whole, and that's something worth crying about.